lawmakers raised concerns over the possibility of China accessing the country's power grid.
Sabi, may vulnerability na ibig sabihin na possible na pwede tayong ma-access yung ating national grid ng State Grid of China.
Well,
Na pwede tayong masabotahe. Vulnerable tayo sa ganong klaseng sitwasyon.
Mr. Chairman,
Moving on to the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, reiterating once again that the country's transmission grid cannot be remotely accessed by China.
the National Security Council, in fact, as well as the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, are working closely with us with regard to these issues. There's no such thing as 100% invulnerable cybersecurity system.
I told the President na mas maganda kung yung systems operations ibalik na lang sa Transco at yung sa maintenance na lang ay mapunta sa NGCP at umuwi naman siya doon. Pero that has to be done through act of Congress.
Government takes another look at the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or the NGCP. At the Senate, lawmakers want to scrutinize the role of China as part owner of NGCP. Malacanang, on the other hand, is considering taking back control of the country's only power grid operator. But how does the state go about this, and can it really afford to do so? We talk about this tonight on the Chiefs. Welcome to the weekend edition of the Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao. With me tonight in the studio, Ana Marie Pamintuan, the editor-in-chief of the Philippine Star, and Lucy Cruz Valdez, the head of News 5. Ladies, happy weekend.
Good evening.
Happy weekend. And yeah, just to be clear again, Ami Pamintuan and Lingao.
Oh, yeah. We're two different people. We are not related. Talagang hindi mo nalimutan eh. Pero hindi ko nalimutan yung Siopaw.
Yung lunch pa nga ako sa kanya.
Ay, oo nga.
Nalimutan mo na.
Siopaw lang.
Siopaw lang. Kaya nalimutan mo kaagad. Okay,
Anyway.
what do we have on the table for the whole week? Mukhang pinag-usapan ng NGCP pa na.
Take your pick, NGCP or
Tebes.
Tebes.
So,
Yes. Kukumustahin ko, umuulan ngayon eh. Nag-blackout ba sa inyo?
hindi naman.
Wala.
Hindi naman.
Hindi ba kaya, yan ang pinoproblema, di ba?
Yes natin ngayon.
Yan ang pinoproblema kasi, di ba? Kaya nagkaroon ng ganitong usapan dahil nagba-blackout.
Kasi
Especially starting with NAIA.
kung walang
Diba?
kung walang tubig, walang ulan,
Lahat-lahat
power
ulan.
supply problem. Pag maraming
Yan
ulan
na nga
naman, transmission problem.
Kaya nga, yun ang nga ang
Ang
problema.
saya-saya ng buhay natin dito, no? Kaya gumagaling tayo eh. Kasi ang dami nating obstacles.
Daming challenges.
Opportunities for... Ay, nako.
Of course,
ganito
center
na lang
stage there.
talaga. This is where we are, and well, truth be told, alam nyo naman, this is not the first time we're tackling this
Yes.
subject, and except that now it's in the Senate,
Yeah.
and
I was reading back a bit
serious yung
May
proposal at dumating na sa Malacanang, di ba?
Nagbabalak ang Malacanang.
Nagbabalak
No,
talaga
hindi naman nagbabalak. They're open.
Considering.
I was
They're
reading
open.
back a bit. As early as 2014 or 2015, it was already an issue, especially
course.
after the West Philippine Sea, the Scarborough
Yes.
Shoal issue. Malacanang decided then to withhold or withdraw the working visas of 18 Chinese nationals working with the NGCP.
Yes.
Oo.
So doon pa lang nangyari na yun.
Yan. Matatanong natin kung ano nga ba ang
Nangyari
kayang
sa-
gawin. Naku, anong kayang gawin within the grid?
Right. Tsaka
Ng
kung
mga
ano ba
foreigners.
talaga is this really a threat? Or it's just being dangled so that certain changes in ownership or takeover can be affected. I mean, yan ang
Yan
mga
ang tinatanong ng mga tao.
Yeah, a lot to talk about tonight. We are starting the conversation with our guests tonight right after this very short break. So please stay with us.
And welcome back to the Chiefs with our guests tonight. NGCP spokesperson, Attorney Cynthia Alabanza, and Francisco Ashley, or ACE Asedillo, National President of the Philippine Institute of Cybersecurity Professionals. Mr. Asedillo was also former representative of the Magdalo party list. Welcome both to the program.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Okay,
Good
let's start
evening,
the
Attorney
conversation. Nako, mainit na mainit ngayon ang Senado sa NGCP, no? It's gone to the extent where even Malacanang has now been consulted on the possibility of reverting it back to government. There's also questions about whether the Chinese can really remotely access our confidential information and use it to its own advantage. So malawak ang problema. First, your reaction, spokesperson Ma'am Alabanza, to the proposal to give it back to the government for it to take over the national grid.
Well, first of all, NGCP's concession agreement and our franchise, we understand that those are privileges granted to us by government. And of course, that is well within their discretion whether they're going to take it back. But of course, there are legal processes involved. And I suppose what we really want to emphasize here is that if we're given an opportunity to explain and answer questions, and for those who are willing to listen, there are so many things that we've done for the transmission system. We've introduced 300 billion worth of investments. There are hundreds of billions more in the pipeline. We've doubled the substation capacity. We have built 3,729 circuit kilometers of lines. We've replaced wood poles na iminana namin sa gobyerno. All of them are now, a lot of them are now steel poles. We've added 28 substations, and all because of private sector initiative. So again, this is well within the authority of government, but we are ready to answer with facts, and all our statements will be borne up
Yes.
by the records.
Okay, just to be fair, no, I think all of this talk has been going on for years now, but recently it was triggered by this unexpected red alert, diba? And everybody, and to think that it was the Luzon grid that was threatened by that, and so that's how the ball kind of like started rolling on the quote-unquote dismal performance of the NGCP. So now you're talking about it, and there's been an audit that's being called, but at the top of the story really is the ownership. Now, whether or not this ownership will have a direct bearing on the service that you've been giving so far, we'd like to tackle that later. But for now, let's start with this so-called threat to national security. And this is where, Sir Ace, this is where you're going to come in, no? How big a threat, or how realistic a threat is this really? The fact that NGCP is 40% owned and could even get bigger if somebody sells out to them, no? How big is this threat? How realistic is it? Na pwede nga po ba talagang makakuha sila ng confidential information through the grid?
Okay, let's talk about electrical grid systems from a general perspective. Kahit saang bansa yan makikita mo, being critical infrastructure, they are really sources of great risk. The way they are operated and the way they need to be secured, as they are great sources of risk. Now, depending on how the operational and security requirements are provided to these systems, doon na po magkakatalo kung secured ba yan o hindi. Now, it's a twofold question, Ms. Lucci, as they are secured by yung national grid natin. I tried as best to determine it both from a direct knowledge perspective as well as from vicarious. Tinitingnan natin yung mga publicly available documents nila. Let's go back siguro 10 years ago in terms of direct knowledge. I know for a fact, having worked with the National Security Council, it was indeed already a concern that time, having had Chinese ownership and Chinese presence within the NGCP premises as well as within the systems, may access po yung mga Chinese nationals. It was already a concern then. In fact, it was a joint concern of the National Security Council, our intelligence agencies, the Department of Justice, and the DILG, and the Department of National Defense, to which they responded accordingly. And I'm sure si Attorney Cynthia is very aware of that. Noon pa lang, they were called out on that already, and they've been working with our government since then. Under the current administration, this government has also been proactive. In fact, just as recently as last March, March 13, if I'm not mistaken, nagkaroon po ng MOA signing between our government through NICA and the CEO of NGCP, specifically to bolster the cybersecurity measures of NGCP. Now, there's a lot to unpack, no, dito sa issue na ito. Kung ang tanong kasi natin dito, ano bang source ito lahat? Was this a supply and performance issue? Is this a ownership issue or economic issue?
Right.
Or is this a security issue? Or is this all of it? Tingin ko it's all of it. Pero it's also important to understand or to unbundle each and every one of these aspects. Kasi po, we might mistake one for the other.
Yes.
And we might, overall, engender a lack of trust and confidence in the NGCP, which is a vital component of our national economy,
Okay, so
which we don't want to happen.
Yes.
I think that is po, no? Ay ang maganda po pag-usapan natin
Yes.
dito.
Kaya nga, so in effect, you're saying, briefly, na pwede talagang ma-breach ang national security through the grid. Tama po ba? So punta tayo ngayon sa ownership because yun na ngayon ang pinanggagalingan ng lack of trust and confidence, no? The fact that it's 40% owned by the Chinese. So I throw back the question to you, Ma'am Cynthia. There have been occasions when top management of the NGCP made up of Chinese, no, 18 of them had been actually deported ba?
Their visas were withheld.
In
no? 2015.
My question is right now, what is the makeup of the management team? How much of the team or how many in the team are actually Chinese?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Lucci. But first of all, I'd like to thank Cesar Ace for making that very clear delineation of the issues. There's a performance issue, there's a security issue, and there's a political issue. So we have to tackle those separately. To answer your question, the management team is 100% Filipino. So that from top to bottom, from the president and CEO up to the working level, it's all Filipino.
Okay, how much control do the Chinese owners, I mean the state grid of China, have over NGCP's operations then?
Well, if you're talking about control and day-to-day, these are in the hands of Filipino. So in that respect, it's all Filipino decision on a day-to-day level. But these Chinese investors, of course, they're entitled as an investor to a commensurate stake of their investment in our board of directors. So that's where they do have representation to the tune of 40%. So on our 10-man board, there are 4 board members, board directors, who are from the SGCC as shareholders.
So attorney, kung sakasakali, what might the Chinese owners be able to do kung sakasakaling magkaroon ng controversy? Halimbawa, in decision making, do they play a significant role?
Again, at the board level, the decision making has to be by consensus. So it's a 40% stake, and majority 60% that's Filipino. So on those board level decisions, those numbers will come into play. But on a day-to-day operational basis, all the management officers are Filipino. So in terms of direct control on day-to-day management, that's 100% Filipino.
Mr. Astudillo, siyempre, ang sabi ng iba masyado naman kasi kayong paranoid, ano? Kumusta yung record ng state grid of China? Has there been a record in other countries? I mean, Chinese companies are heavily invested in a lot of economic activities all over the world. Kumusta yung batting average nila have they ever been involved in this kind of interference na kinatatakot natin?
Interference in terms of the operations of the national grid, none that I know of, no? But in terms of exerting political and economic pressure on the countries where they're heavily invested, absolutely. We have to assume it on that aspect. However, to the point of Attorney Cynthia, and I agree, iba po yung board and management participation as to operational and technical participation. I'm actually more concerned dun sa operational and technical access, no? Kasi dun talaga magkakatalo. That is where we should be fearful of. And I think that is where largely na-address din natin. Now, I'd like to, if you could allow me, I'd like to concentrate on that point. This is the beauty of a recently passed law, Miss Ami, Miss Lucy, and Ed, no? We recently passed a law, RA 11659, which had a twofold objective. One is to liberalize the ownership of public utilities in the country, but at the same time imposing higher standards and metrics in terms of performance and security. And doon ako very interested kasi I believe in the dictum, trust but verify. As much as I engender and I'm encouraging us to trust our national grid, at the same time, siguro the government and the national grid should have a consensual relationship in terms of engendering that trust. And this is where this law comes in, because it actually requires an actual audit, no? Not just of performance, but of security. And alam nyo, that will go a long way in dispelling all of these fears. Kasi all of these are largely, yung operation, yung management, yung supervision, this largely happens out of the eyes of the public. Kaya po, yung hindi alam ng publiko, madali po silang matakot at madadali po silang takutin. So I think that is where this law can come in, and this actual audit should come in. Kasi this is high time. It's high time, no? And not just for the national grid. It's high time actually for government to take a look at all our critical infrastructure. Not just in the Philippines kasi, but in other countries. It's anywhere from 70 to 80, in fact, as much as 90% of all critical infrastructure are in the hands of the private sector. So government has no choice but to work hand in hand with the private sector in terms of not just ensuring performance and reliability, but more importantly, security as well of this critical infrastructure, especially in this case, the national grid, Ms. Ami.
But let me backtrack a bit. Ma'am Cynthia, we've had reference to the technical aspects of the NGCP and the operational aspects. I'm wondering lang, we do have 4 board members of the State Grid Corporation of China in the board, pero dun sa downstream, dun sa technical aspects, I understand kasi that the Chinese participation here is technical more than anything. How much power and control do the Chinese have on the technical aspects? Kasi po, baka doon magkakatalo. Baka doon in the end, magkakaroon ng question na bakit biglang nangyari yun o nangyari ito o bakit biglang naputol ang kuryente or whatever.
Yeah. I'll first want to address that item on audit, there's such a big hullabaloo being made out of, NGCP hasn't been audited, and all of this, no. But we have been audited. We're subjected to an annual inspection by Transco and the PSAM. The performance audit is actually supposed to be conducted by the ERC every time we renew yung regulatory period, that's every 5 years. But it hasn't been conducted by the ERC, not because NGCP resisted it. In fact, we were prepared for the 4th and 5th regulatory audit. It just wasn't conducted. And I think they're doing it right now, yung 4th and 5th. As regards in technological participation, you're absolutely right. The reason there's a foreign partner here is because government intended under the EPIRA to improve the technological aspect of energy, especially in transmission.
Yes, ma'am.
And they make recommendations, and this is where the safeguards happen. So at the board level, when you make decisions on how the technology or the technical aspect of the operations will be conducted, there is that already 60-40 protection in place. So if there is something that the Filipinos feel that shouldn't be implemented because, for whatever reason, there is always that vote. And of course, the second layer of protection here is at the management level, where you have 100% Filipinos, and everything that has happened at the implementation level is all done by Filipino engineers and executives and rank and filers. Thirdly, we have subjected ourselves to the inspection by numerous government security agencies, including, as Mr. Asadillo said, the NICA. We just recently signed in 2019. There was an audit. There was a surprise visit. I recall this. There was little to no notice of the visit of then National Security Advisor General Esperon. So he went to the office, not just here in Quezon City, where our National System Operations is located, but they also went around and visited other facilities across the country in North Luzon, in the Visayas and Mindanao. So, we've always been open to scrutiny because, as Mr. Asadillo clearly pointed out, when people don't understand something, it's so easy to be fearful of that. So the only way we can address it is to assure them and, invite them to come and see for themselves, and not just even the security agencies of the government. We've welcomed Department of Energy secretaries, heads of agencies, congressmen, senators, even media personnel, and they are only subject to internal security measures that we also implement because this is a vital facility, and so we have to ensure that anyone who comes in has to, will not pose a physical threat. So, short of, putting ourselves on display for the entire public, we've done everything to assure, the lawmakers, the elected and appointed officials that, we pursue our mandate in accordance with the terms that they placed in the concession agreement and in the franchise. And we hope that, they will see past the fears and look at us as a Filipino corporation just conducting the mandate they gave us.
We understand. Ma'am, but let me ask you this, and let me ask this as well of Ashley Asadillo over there. Is it at all possible for the Chinese experts down the line to install equipment, hardware, even software down the line, which could in any way interfere with our operation of our grid system,
and which could escape the, well, sabihin na lang natin, technical eyes or expertise of the Filipinos whom you say actually operate NGCP on a day-to-day level?
Because these are experts that we took in from China because they know the equipment more than I suppose we would, because the equipment also comes from China.
Okay, I'll take that question. In the realm of possibility, anything is possible. So you can only mitigate the risk. So in that respect, we have put in so many safeguards, including the vetting of our personnel, including making sure that the system operations which runs the grid is a standalone system, not connected at all to the internet. So it's protected by an air gap, among many other protections in the system. And we have been subjected, like I said, to cybersecurity inspections. I think the one conducted by the NSA was in coordination with the DICT then. And they did have suggestions on how to improve it, but I think the general finding was that the security in NGCP is robust. And there's another one being conducted by the ERC right now. This is something that, we take seriously, and we want to ensure, or at least mitigate at the highest possible degree, any risk that may be in terms of safeguarding the facility.
Okay, can I just ask Ashley? Ashley, in 2022, there was a study initiated by the Asia Foundation through Secure Connections, Cybersecurity in the Philippines.
Familiar with it.
Kasama ka doon?
Yeah, actually, I was part of the panel that reviewed it.
Okay, sir. Well, some things that I saw that were of interest, and I quote, security experts have identified electric power and gas companies as the most vulnerable to cyber-related risks. I suppose this is in reference to the Philippines because this is a study for the Philippines. As well, a hacker with the right tools, access, and knowledge could identify the supervisory control and data acquisition systems, or SCADA, and industrial control systems, ICS, used to operate critical infrastructure and facilities in the oil and gas industry, and that are connected to the internet. how real is the potential danger of this in our case? Well, then again, this is a study for the Philippines, so I suppose this is in reference to us.
Like I said kanina, Ed, no, across the board, any electrical grid system is highly vulnerable. It depends on the operator securing it, how robust or how insecure that system is. And I would hazard to say na by and large, no, yung NGCP knows its stuff. I actually came across several of its publicly available documents. Of course, this is subject to further vetting down the line. But what I'm saying is, in terms of perception, in terms of the mindset and attitude, they have the right mindset and attitude about how to secure their system. And I'm referring specifically on the cybersecurity aspect. No, now in the case specifically of NGCP and how it can be undermined, it would have to be a very persistent, a very sophisticated, and very technologically advanced attacker.
Yes.
And that can only be a country. It
Yes,
cannot
sir.
be a small group. It
Yes,
cannot
sir.
be a
Kaya nga,
lone wolf hacker. It cannot be
That
a
also sounds like China.
That's
small
why.
criminal organization.
That's why,
No?
Sir Ace, you know, ito nga yung
Which
tanong
brings
eh.
to the point. Yeah,
Yes,
so sorry.
yeah. How do you overcome the national distrust over China?
Kaya nga, babalik ako doon sa earlier point ko, Ms. Lucci, government and NGCP have to work hand in hand. Yeah, in fact, adverting to the earlier report, being cited by Ed, the overall recommendation of that report was for the government to come up with a critical infrastructure protection strategy. That
Okay.
includes NGCP, our telcos, and other vital systems of the country. Kasi if I may further explain by way of another system, what if I told you that our major telco providers used to be provided solely with Chinese components and Chinese suppliers?
Right.
That alone tells you, even if hindi kalikutin niya ng Chinese, the components themselves and the software embedded in them are already a source of risks. That's what I'm saying. No? So, going back to the NGCP as it applies to them, the sensors that allow the monitoring control system to monitor our power grid, and the SCADA that allows them to control it. These are vital components. These are electrical components, interconnected systems that could be sources of attacks. Ito tingin ko ang pinaka most vulnerable. And you have to remember, when we're talking about securing our power system, we're not only talking about NGCP. You're talking about securing our power generators, our grid, national grid, kung saan tumatakbo yung kuryente, at saka syempre yung mga distributors natin who have their own electrical systems as well, which are cybernetically connected and which must be cyber secure as well. Right. So kaya nga, ito po, dapat tingnan natin na pangkalahatan. We might be putting a microscope only to one component of a system that we must otherwise be securing.
Okay,
so going back to the point, is there an incentive for China to undermine us? Absolutely.
Of course.
Is there a way for them to do this? They're one of the top 3 cyber powers in the country.
Yeah.
They are perfectly capable of doing this.
Oo.
Will
Yeah.
they be able to do it? Well, that remains to be seen because, again, we need to find out once and for all. And I think sinabi naman ni Attorney Cynthia that they welcome the opportunity to be put under that microscope.
Okay, habol lang ako, no? Of course, yes, that's true. We know that about China. So the logical question is, if we revert the ownership back to the government, can we trust the government to actually secure NGCP? That's my question to you. Is that the solution to this problem? Will we trust the government to do a better job than it feels NGCP is doing now?
Having served in government, Ms. Lucci, how about a more fundamental question? Will they be able to provide good service to begin with?
Yes,
Let alone secure it.
Yes.
Kasi, we should be very careful with our prospective solutions because they have second and third order effects. We may solve, tingin natin, a problem in its first order effect. Pero we might not like the second and third order effects of that, which is to revert back to the original problem, which was government not being able to provide reliable, predictable, and sustainable power.
Okay.
Diba? Yun naman ang naging problema natin dati.
Yes, that's
Ngayon,
true.
pinag-uusapan natin security, tas gusto nating ibalik, baka naman dagdagan po natin yung problema. So, I think I would, hazard to say that that in that aspect, Ms. Lucci.
Okay, that's a good point to take off from when we return. We're just going to take a quick breather. We will continue this discussion after the break. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Chief. Still with us, NGCP spokesperson Cynthia Alabanza and Francisco Ashley Asadillo, National President of the Philippine Institute of Cybersecurity Professionals. Mr. Asadillo, mga kumpanya naman natin, they are really involved with foreign companies, no? Nakikisosyo talaga yan eh. And we haven't banned China from investing in our country. In fact, we are trying to get, I think, more Chinese to invest here, no? So, babalikan ko lang yung a point you raised earlier. You said China in other countries has tried to exert pressure on governments. Lilinawin ko lang, did they use a transmission grid in any of those? Ang naiintindihan ko, they really use economic pressure. They've used it on us to get certain policies, no? Or to get what they want. Pero wala pa ako nababalitaan na ginamit yung transmission grid. Is there any basis for these fears? Uulitin ko yung tanong na yon.
Thank you, Ms. Ami. No? And I'm venturing into a field which is not really my expertise. But sige, let's deal with that. If we are not there yet, no? If they're not able to exert pressure on us by virtue of their presence in the board of our national grid, then let's not allow them to even reach that point. There are existing laws that prevent them from doing so. Again, going back to the economic/political aspect of it, the NGCP should not be a source of leverage for the Chinese government because we cannot bifurcate this issue from our existing maritime zones conflict with them. Hindi yan mapaghihiwalay. We cannot, we cannot put it in one box. Sige, dyan lang yan, no? Tas dito lang tayo mag-uusap. No. In the realm of international relations, everything is connected, everything is intertwined. So, when we seek investments, when we seek joint ventures with other countries, especially with China, we should be very, very careful that these investments and these joint ventures do not become counterproductive for us as a source of leverage for these countries, especially in this case, China, Ms. Ami.
Well, ang problema nga kasi, I think when this contract was being drawn up at naghahanap ng partners ng NGCP, wala namang ban on China from participating. So, tatanungin ko lang si Attorney Alabanza, when this deal was being worked out with the Chinese company, State Grid Corporation, did you ever get any warning from any sector na, oy, maghanap na lang kayo ng ibang bansa na papasok as a partner kasi baka magka-problema kayo down the line?
Yeah, just to clarify, no, this wasn't a negotiated deal. In fact, government was very eager to privatize it because they needed money to pay for the debts of the National Power Corporation at that time. In fact, they had gone through 4 rounds of bidding. 3 of them failed. And at every bidding, there were foreign companies invested. It just really so happened that the best bid was from the consortium that had the Chinese as partners. So again, were we warned in any way or form that this was down the line going to be unacceptable? No. In fact, when you bid it out, when they bid it out, there were 2 stages. Of course, yung qualification, meaning they had to assess vis-a-vis their own criteria whether the bidders or the consortium are acceptable to the government, and of course the financial bid, whichever gave the best financial advantage to government. So at that time, the consortium went through all the processes, and they were deemed acceptable to government, which is why eventually the consortium was incorporated into NGCP. It signed the concession agreement, which was take it or leave it from government. It was a draft that was fed to the bidders, and they had to they couldn't negotiate that after the award. And later on, Congress, after what you have to assume was a thorough study of the concession agreement, granted us a 50-year franchise. So we had no inkling at that point that this would be a sore point, at least from the side of government. Of course, this is something that I suppose should have been foreseen because of the identity of our partners. But again, this is a business decision. It wasn't political. It wasn't negotiated. It wasn't the Chinese government who went to the Philippine government and said, "We'll do this for you." This was done through an open, competitive, and public bidding. So again, that's as much as we can do, insofar as we're just a private company given a mandate and pursuing our contract.
Ma'am Cynthia, even now, I'm sure you know na tinitira rin yung unconscionable, quote-unquote, dividends being paid to the owners, no, amounting to something like 187 billion in just 10 years of your operations. What's your take on that? Does this mean ang contrast nga is being made between the poor public service, the dismal performance, and the fortune that is now being enjoyed by the owners?
First of all, our revenue is capped and highly regulated by the government. Second of all, when you're investing in the billions and you earn in, let's say, thousands, maybe that's something that people should be concerned with, because then it means you're not a very good businessman. And really, the idea of privatization was to make it profitable enough so that it wouldn't have to rely, the development wouldn't have to rely on subsidies from the public coffers. So again, I don't know why earning money has become so demonized, especially since at the end of the day, the records will bear out that we have invested 300 billion into the transmission grid. The transmission rates have gone down, and these are records that are available from the Energy Regulatory Commission. We're talking about transmission wheeling rates kasi meron silang pinapakolekta sa amin na ancillary services, which are pass-through charges directly to the generators also. So if you look at the transmission wheeling rates per unit, bumaba yan from the time government was running it. Plus also performance metrics that are being measured by the ERC will also show that that NGCP has improved its services. There are less transmission-related outages. The frequency and voltage regulation has improved continuously in 14 years. So, these are things that people have to, I hope people recognize. And, if you don't take our word for it, there are public records available to bolster our claims.
Let me throw in another variable that may or may not be an important element here, and I'd leave it to both of you to help us weed things out. Let me start off with Ashley. Sir, I'm referring to National Intelligence Law of China, the National Intelligence Law of China. Article 7 states or obliges Chinese citizens and companies and organizations to assist in the intelligence gathering of the Chinese government. That's Article 7. Article 10 basically says that includes Chinese citizens and organizations and companies that are also abroad. I'm wondering if this should be an element that we should be considering or be concerned about in relation to Chinese stake in some of our utilities, including the NGCP.
Across the board, absolutely, that's a concern. In fact, you will see that problem in many technology companies ngayon, which are registered and headquartered in China, but also have a large footprint abroad. Case in point, Zoom and TikTok. May mga back-end yan in China. Ibig sabihin, lahat ng Zoom calls, na nangyari
Like this one.
this past few
Like
years,
this one.
pwedeng
Like this
access
one.
ni China yan
Minomonitor
theoretically.
kayo
And
ngayon
it's
sa
true.
Beijing.
In fact, kasi may suit na nga against TikTok
Yes.
regarding that. And no, now, what is the implication of that dito sa NGCP in particular? Let's go to the extreme. If the Chinese government calls upon the members of the board and management that are of Chinese nationality, again, theoretically, they can invoke that law, and these Chinese nationals, even if they refuse, they will have
No choice.
but to oblige, which now brings up the question, what kind of access do they have in terms of the inner workings of the NGCP? Tingin ko, dun nagkakatalo eh, dun ang crucial eh. Kasi if they will have access to this information, and by law, no, and in theory, pwede yang i-mandate na kunin ng Chinese government by way of this national intelligence law. And yes, that is another source of risk para sa atin, no, through the NGCP in that aspect, Ed.
So Mr. Asedillo, dahil nga nabanggit ko na nga, hindi naman bandang mga Chinese companies from investing here. And in fact, we are inviting them nga eh. Ano kaya yung legal remedy? You have been a former representative in Congress. You think we need legislation to siguro keep Chinese companies out of public utilities, for example? You think this is a remedy, or is there an executive order that can remedy this situation just to address all these fears? Because of course we understand where all the concerns are coming from, considering what's happening in the West Philippine Sea, our relations right now with China. Ano kaya ang pwedeng gawin?
Constitutionally, our policy is supposed to be friends to all and enemies to none. However, given the current realities, no, we have to be very, very pragmatic about our approach. In many countries, they have actively, I don't want to use the word ban, no, but they have actively excluded by way of contractual restrictions, legal restrictions, the use of Chinese components and software. We can do the same, especially in the areas of mission critical systems, telcos, our air transport, our power grid, so on and so forth. No? And as many of these critical infra that we can identify. The reason being is that both passive threats and active risks reside in these systems, and the presence of foreign components which cannot be fully vetted is by themselves a source of threat. Kaya po, it should be a host of approaches. Legislation will be one of them. Another is a critical infrastructure strategy, encompassing both not just the public, but most especially the private sector, who own and operate many of these systems. And thirdly, we should also take a look at our friends out abroad, what their experience has been in this regard. Kasi it's a good, and also it's a good source for many of these best practices. Ano na bang nangyayari? For case in point, no, yung massive reliance ng US on foreign microchips. They have started to bring back microchip manufacturing to the country, to their country, because they understand that many of the high-tech equipment running throughout the world today are manufactured largely in one country, Taiwan. And China is heavily invested in Taiwan and is also heavily looking at reclaiming Taiwan. So that in itself is a source of great risk for many technology companies that reside in the US and in fact even in Europe. So we should look at it from that perspective, because it's inevitable eh. Yung interconnectedness ng global supply chain is there na. So you could virtually see, kahit titingnan mo si NGCP, marami sa components niya would come from many places, and some of these, and one specific place disproportionately, and I'm talking about China. So even without actively inviting in people from China, which is not the intention, of course, even just looking at these components, you can already, sense that maybe there could be threats there. And the only way to find out really is to actively seek them out. because it's a very technical, it's a very complicated process, and it's not very forthright and very easy to do.
Attorney Alabanza, we might actually be headed in this direction. How will the NGCP react if these policies are rolled out?
Well, again, no, what we do have is a privilege from government, and as has always been the tone of NGCP's business, conducting its business, we comply with everything that the government tells us to do. And as regards, they may see Mr. Astudillo makes a very good point in saying that it's difficult to ignore China because even if when we publicly bid out the components of our system, even if it's, let's say, European branded, at the end of the day, when they supply it to us, we don't know where they come from. And sometimes it often is the case that it comes from China anyway. So again, there is no deliberate attempt to make all of this China or sourced from China. There is a process by which it's a competitive process by which we procure our equipment, and we do, which is why also the flip side of that is we can only mitigate. So we are tying up with the government agencies on this to ensure that whatever we may miss, they can provide us with advice, and especially the one from our agreement with the NICA, that the main purpose of that was it's really for intelligence exchange, so that if they receive intelligence that may be threatening to NGCP as a national vital infrastructure system, that can be fed to us, and we can make the necessary adjustments to keep the system as much as possible, protected from all sorts of risks that we may encounter. So again, NGCP conducts its business as best we can with using the international best practices. We subject ourselves to audits and even certifications by numerous companies to ensure that what we're doing is world class, and we can only ask that government help us secure the facilities. And apart from that, that's all a private company can do. We do rely on government to help us protect the system.
Okay, of course, we go back to the basic reason why this is even an issue, and that is really the delivery of electric service in the country. And if we talk about that, Ma'am Cynthia, I'm sure you know that if you ask the ordinary Filipino now how they feel about power and the delivery of power in the Philippines, talagang everybody will agree it sucks. Of course, you're just one part of the whole system, but it doesn't help that, we hear about failures of power in places like Occidental Mindoro, where there were only 4 hours a day of electricity, and it took so long before that was resolved. And then, of course, these unexpected blackouts or brownouts. No? How can you assure us that indeed the delivery of your service in terms of the power is something that will be resolved even if the franchise stays with you?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to explain the Occidental Mindoro thing. They're not connected to the grid, but we do want them connected because they are part of a larger plan to strengthen the system. We had applied for that as far back as 2011 with the Energy Regulatory Commission because we are highly regulated and we can't pursue any of our projects without getting the nod of the ERC. So in 2011, we applied for that. It remained unacted upon. And in 2021, the system had changed. So it warranted withdrawal of the old filing and a refiling to reflect the adjustment to the transmission system at that point. We've only gotten the go signal from the ERC last February 2023, so that's something we're pursuing right now. As regards, I think, it's a case of shooting the messenger dito, no? We do make announcements because in the name of transparency, we want to make sure that people know and understand what's going on. In the case of the Negros Panay blackouts and the recent red alert, the transmission system functions as it should have in both cases. We have been coordinating, and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but the reality of the situation was that the power plants and their protection systems were no longer in sync with ours. So we have been coordinating with them to ensure that if there are any adjustments to be made in their protection settings post testing, because we do test them before they connect to the grid. If there are any adjustments to be made after we test them and ensure that their settings will not result in a degradation of the transmission system, that if they're going to do anything to those settings, let us know. Because once that these settings are no longer in sync, you will see instances like the red alert that happened in, I think, May 8th, and then the Panay blackout in April 27, 28, and 29. So I'm not saying that NGCP has never caused transmission power interruption, because of course, like I said, it's a handoff between three sectors of the energy industry, and any disturbance along any of the three sectors along that the chain can produce power interruptions. But in those two instances, the grid functioned as it should have. Plus, my last point here is NGCP for the past 3, 4, 5 years has been announcing that we feel that the supply of energy has been outpaced by the growth in demand. And we have repeatedly said that we have to start looking at a more balanced influx of energy investments in terms of technology. We have to look at a more balanced planning of the generation assets in terms of location, and that when the power development plan of the country is being crafted by the Department of Energy, due consideration must be given to the requirements of the transmission system in terms of voltage, in terms of voltage control. Because there are many ways to skin a cat. There are many ways to address the problems in energy resiliency, and transmission can only provide solutions insofar as their sector is concerned. But if you want a long-term and a holistic approach, you have to look at all three sectors of the energy industry to ensure this, to ensure that we are resilient energy-wise.
Mr. Asedillo, pahabol na lang na question. You mentioned certain measures that the government can undertake now. Like the US and other countries have banned their governments from using TikTok. In government offices, of course. Are you recommending that in the Philippines?
Or anything along those lines?
Along those lines, yes.
Not just TikTok, no, but
TikTok
anything that collects personal information in a massive way, and whose back-end storage is in China or accessible by way of
paano yung Zoom? We're on Zoom right
We're on Zoom now.
Paano yun?
Although Ed and I and Amy, we have no secrets.
Ako part Chinese ako. No secret.
Ikaw pala eh.
I'm part Chinese. Paano yan? We're
Same
using
40%
Zoom.
natin. 30%.
Paano yan?
In fact, going back to Zoom, let's take Zoom for example. I advised a senior official of government in the previous administration about the use of Zoom for
confidential
critical discussions in government. No, I actually advised them to desist from doing so, precisely because doon pa lang nalaman ng sangkatauhan na there's actually such a thing as Zoom bombing. Somebody cuts into your Zoom discussion, which is otherwise closed within your group, but biglang may sumingit. And it was not because somebody passed on the Zoom access, no? What I'm saying is, there are technical and complicated ways to undermine you by way of such, Chinese technologies. Sinasabi ko dito, we should have a healthy sense and amount of paranoia, because in the same manner that dual technologies, which were developed for the military, eventually find their way to the civilian, and vice versa, civilian technologies eventually finding military uses. Even investments now, in this new world of hybrid cars, even economic investments can be weaponized. So, and you have to understand specifically how that plays into the strategy and the trajectory of the Chinese government vis-a-vis the role of the Chinese Communist Party. It's a complicated discussion, but what I'm saying is, it's not bad to have this healthy sense of paranoia, because as events are unfolding now, no? Ginagamit na po talaga, hindi lamang po ang military and intelligence, but even economic means to increase the power of one country over another. And all countries that have become superpowers are guilty of this. But there are countries more known for certain tactics and strategies to undermine other countries. And we should not be at the raw end of this. We should not be at the receiving end of this.
Yes, sir. No, sir, do we have enough?
It's also good to have a certain sense of paranoia over this.
But sir, do we have enough of that paranoia? Are our officials paranoid enough? I hate to put it that way.
Or are we overly
Oh.
paranoid? I mean, it cuts both ways, right?
And have we done enough about this? Kasi these are important points that you're making right now. There are things that are so we have so many vulnerabilities left and right, technology-wise and software-wise. Are we, government, the public, are we part enough? Are we doing enough? And what else has to be done?
Kaya itong forum na to, Ed, is very important. No? Kasi we need to separate the wheat from the chaff. We need to separate paranoia, which is bordering on hysteria, and healthy paranoia, which allows us to think, saan ba talaga tayo vulnerable? What do we need to do in order to remove that vulnerability? In some cases, not only do we not have the enough amount of paranoia, we don't even know what we need to know. First, we have to know kasi where we are vulnerable and what we can do to address that vulnerability. And pangalawa, doon naman kung may alam na tayo, medyo anuhan na natin, rendahan na naman natin yung ating pagka-hysterical kasi it's also not good for us to be operating on the basis of hysteria because that usually leads to ill-informed and unwise decisions. And we don't want to make ill-informed and unwise decisions which have permanent consequences, which we will have to undo. And I'm not referring alone to IPIRA. No? Diba? So, nagkukumahog tayo, tumakbo tayo sa private sector. Tapos ngayon, we are penalizing the private sector for making money out of a proposal which we brought to them in the first place. What instead we need to do is go to them and say, look, we have this concern from our people. Can you address them? Can you work with us? Can you be transparent with us? Can we, can we have a public discussion about this? Can we have transparency about this? I think that should be the attitude, Ed, no? Kasi it doesn't help me to be hysterical.
I
To be
think
paranoid, yes.
there's a third group that's neither healthily paranoid,
Malusog na kapaningan.
nor overly paranoid. And that's the group that totally ignores the issue.
Apathetic.
And many of them are in TikTok.
Yan na nga.
All right, yeah.
Ed.
Okay, maraming salamat, Mr. Ashley Asadillo at Attorney Cynthia Albanza. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Salamat
Thank
po,
you.
ma'am, sir.
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
And that's it for the Chiefs. I'm Ed Lingao.
We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. I'm Ami Pamintuan.
And I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez. We are One News, all sides, all the time.